You think the abysmal response to Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull back in 2008 would have been enough to disparage the folks at Disney and Lucasfilms from ever making another Indiana Jones film. But alas, Kathleen Kennedy seems to have proven that those Johnson gobbling skills seem to be the absolute best of Hollywood, as somehow she managed to convince studio heads and the most geriatric cast to date to star in a fifth Indiana Jones film. Surely with an absolute Chad like Harrison Ford on board, though, it can't be that bad, right?
It's worse. It's so much worse.
Dear viewer, it was, and so much so that I genuinely felt personally attacked at how lazy, ingenuine, and absolutely absurd this entire entry was. Dare I say Crystal Skull had a better premise, and that film featured the French-jawed equivalent of a crusty booger. For real, how do you go from Sean Connery to Harrison Ford to Shia LaBeouf in the Jones bloodline? Dial of Destiny opens in World War II Germany, where a digitally de-aged Indy has infiltrated a Nazi base in order to recover the Spear of Destiny, a fabled artifact that was rumored to have pierced Christ during his crucifixion. Turns out the spear the Nazis obtained was a fake, but a far more interesting artifact lies in their possession called the Antikythera, or the Dial of Destiny, or rather half of it, a mechanism that was created 2,000 years prior by famed Greek mathematician Archimedes and held the potential for time travel. With this opening sequence, we also have the introduction of the film's primary antagonist, Dr. Voller, played by the absolutely amazing Mads Mikkelsen. As with Indy, he's been de-aged for the purpose of this scene, which, despite looking a little obvious at times, was quite good. Until you realize that they didn't bother to adjust Harrison Ford's voice, so you're looking at a 45-year-old Indy that sounds like Clint Eastwood scowling at his East Asian neighbors. The opening scene was action-packed and quite fun, even if the CGI of many of the backgrounds felt disingenuous to the stellar practical effects we'd seen in prior Indiana Jones films. Sadly, any praise for this film ends about here. Fast forward to 1969, and man has just landed on the moon. Amidst the citywide celebration, a much older Jonesy, who's in the process of divorcing Marion, has become a bitter old drunk and, quite honestly, is nothing close to the Indiana Jones we've all come to idolize. He's still teaching, though, albeit with far less starry-eyed, barely legal harlots eye-humping him through his lectures. Throughout this scene, he describes, coincidentally, the background of the Dial of Destiny, how it was created and lost during the siege of Syracuse in Sicily in about 200 BCE, and his goddaughter is in the lecture hall, engaging in some back and forth with him, unbeknownst to him. As his seminar is interrupted by footage of our moon landing heroes, Jones ventures to a bar where he and his goddaughter, Helena Shaw, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, are properly reacquainted. Helena is the daughter of a sidekick we saw Indy with in the opening sequence, and she's interested in finding the dial, the same artifact that she was led to believe was lost and also drove her father insane. In an offhand little quip, Indy asks why Helena would want to seek out the very thing that drove her father mad, completely disregarding that Indy basically did that 30 years prior in The Last Crusade. Though, forewarning, Helena's reasoning for this whole adventure is far less heartwarming compared to that film's. Anyways, Indy takes her back to the university archives and reveals that he has one half of the dial there, and hid it away to protect her father. As they're discussing the artifact, the pair are interrupted by a butched-out group of baddies who are working under none other than Voller, who since the end of the war has become a world-renowned physicist responsible for putting man on the moon, and has also been quietly following Helena as she searches for the dial. Chase ensues, one that in almost all its entirety was spoiled by the trailers for this movie, and has such jarring CGI backgrounds that I could feel the last of my aesthetically tuned brain cells shriveling up.
I'm the only brain cell left. Well, at least I have my books.
Helena totally fucks on Indy here, by the way, just ditching him to die despite basically being family, but you know, that's meant to be empowering for females when they have no heart whatsoever. Helena gets away, and even though it was a safe assumption to think she was recovering the dial for dear Pops, turns out no. She just wanted to travel to Tangiers and auction it off so she could pay off some debts. Indy catches on to this auction conveniently through the 30-second appearance of his past sidekick Sala, who not only knows where this is going down, but the precise hotel it's going down in, and he finds Helena alongside her bootleg quesadilla short round at this auction, and Voller somehow knows too, so plot happens. A little boinkery and Voller manages to escape with the dial, so Helena, Indy, and Taco Bell short round hop in a cart and chase after him, but are also chased by Helena's former lover who'd heard about the auction too, and just wants her head now as either a trophy or to skullfuck. Who knows? This entire chase sequence is overdrawn and takes from previous Indy tropes that were done far better better and with far more charisma. Indy is relegated to basically a taxi driver, and Helena takes the place of the Indy we've always come to know in these kinds of situations. It's about here that if it hadn't been obvious already, this is a Helena sequel, not an Indiana Jones sequel, as her character garners far more screen time than is necessary for what little worth she adds to the script. Indy's just arguing with her through this whole car chase, and somewhere in there, this broad has the audacity to call herself beautiful, self-sufficient, and independent. Yes, because there's nothing that screams self-sufficient like abandoning your 90-year-old godfather to die and digging yourself into so much debt that you have to auction off goods stolen from said family while simultaneously taking advantage of a 12-year-old homeless boy to do your bidding. Unlike Mutt Williams and Crystal Skull, who seem to have some redeeming factors in his dedication to family and desire to save those around him, Helena is a hollow shell of a woman, and one who was so insufferable through this entire film that the sight of her bleak face just made me want to take her woodpecker nose and gouge my eyes out with it. Voller gets away, and Helena, because woman, has all her father's crazy notes memorized and knows where to go to get the other half of the dial, which is lying in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece. This entire conversation just begs to ask why this stupid bitch didn't just take off to find the other half first, then sell everything together. But then we'd be deprived of an unoriginal car chase sequence and runtime, I guess. Indy says he's got a diver friend out there that can help, and insert an almost unrecognizable peg-legged Antonio Banderas. Antonio takes him out to sea, and they conveniently know the exact spot the wreck is in, and turns out it's in an area full of eels which look a lot like snakes, to discount Short Round because apparently it isn't an Indiana Jones film without snakes now. I'd like to add that we see giant centipedes later on, and those look far more snaky than eels. But Indy had no shtick with that, but whatever, nostalgic dialogue, right? Turns out the other half of the dial isn't in the wreck, but instead there's a tablet written in code that will lead to the other half, which conveniently is now located in Archimedes' tomb. And Voller shows up, again somehow, to kill some dudes in an attempt to take the tablet for himself. The entire interlude where he tries to steal it is basically just a reason for the Helena Shaw show, in which we have her quirky and super duper smart personality shine through an entire trope that is much more suited for a woman that can actually help men achieve erections. They blow some dynamite as a distraction, escape on Voller's boat, and learn that the tablet is actually just a slab of wax containing a golden casino chip. I have no fucking clue what this thing is, but it's got the coordinates on it and helps them figure out that they're going to eastern Sicily to find Archimedes' tomb. Voller, who seems to have the eyes of a Chinese spy balloon, watches them take off on their tiny speedboat from the coast of Greece all the way to Sicily on a single tank of gas. They find the tomb, which is located inside a tourist attraction, but I guess nobody gave fuck all about checking that before designating it as an attraction. And the pair use the casino chip to figure out the way to the tomb. Insert a line about how Indy doesn't know what he's doing here because he's got a bunch of joint replacements and dyspelsia and shouldn't be doing this shit anymore. They find Archimedes' tomb and are shocked by the fact that he has a modern watch on his hand, and the engravings on his tomb feature pictures of plane engines. Foreshadowing. In the tomb is also the other half of the dial, and Voller shows up conveniently again, threatens to shoot Helena. Indy gives him the dial to save her. She finally displays some actual emotion, and Voller decides to just take a shot Indy with him on his time travel journey because not only did the writers back themselves into a plot corner, but they didn't have any balls to kill Indy. Just saying, Voller and his dudes had zero issue laying lead into anyone and everyone throughout this film, but whatever, plot thickening. Voller enters some coordinates into the now fixed dial and reveals here that his plan is to go back in time through a time fissure and kill Hitler. Not because Hitler is bad, but because the dude fucked up so much and Voller knows how to make the Nazis victorious, thus being able to change the course of history. This time fissure is conveniently in the middle of the storm, and that means we get another awesome CGI sequence, this time in the air and featuring planes. So, remember earlier how I mentioned that Voller had become a world-famous physicist and helped build the ships that got man to the moon? Yeah, it turns out this dude is so smart that he didn't factor in continental drift into his time travel calculations. A theory which suggests that continents shift over time, thus changing the geographical makeup of the Earth's surface. And a theory that was only proven in modern times through observation in 1968, and Joan conveniently suddenly knows about and can also predict, but whatever, plot. This whole time, it had been theorized that they would travel back to August 20th, 1939, 2 weeks before Germany invaded Poland, and Voller even brought his Nazi uniform to be prepared. Mads Mikkelsen makes a hot Nazi. By the way, this whole time Helena had snuck onto the plane through a wheel on a motorcycle or whatever. Development. Since Voller didn't account for this previously unmentioned and relatively new phenomenon, he freaks out as they cross through the time fissure, and they come out not 30 years prior, but 2,000 years prior. How could we ever have seen that coming? Plane gets shot down, Indy is finally feeling the effects of that gunshot wound, and he meets the Archimedes and tells Helena that he wants to stay here because only for the duration of this movie has it been his life's dream to witness this battle and stuff. Helena's like, fuck no, and pulls a girl power moment, knocks Indy out, and takes him back to 1969. Cut to a bandaged Indy waking up, and Marion is there because Helena called her, and apparently there's no animosity between them anymore. Despite Indy revealing earlier that the death of their son in Vietnam had basically destroyed their marriage and pushed it to a point of no return where Marion doesn't even want to talk to him anymore. Yeah, also a super convenient way to eliminate Mutt Williams' writing team. Marion asks if he's back, which I don't know about y'all, but that was totally confusing because it was completely out of left field, and insert that elbow kissing trope from Raiders, and that's it. That's Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I can't think of a bigger waste of $300 million than an absolutely useless entry that completely destroys not only the Indiana Jones franchise, but systematically undoes the reason why audiences fell in love with the character in the first place. When we first got a taste for Mr. Jones back in the early 1980s, we got an absolute Chad that had no problem taking out baddies, raiding dangerous caveats, and rightfully manhandling women in ways romance novels can only begin to half-assedly describe. Gone is the whimsical hero and replaced with an aged hobbly-wobbly that mimics elder reality rather than the high-tea fantasy that attracted us to him in the first place. I didn't feel as though I was watching the Indiana Jones on screen, but instead an actor that was far too old to be acting in general, and the continuous theme playing in the background didn't change that in the slightest. The feeling of triumph and pride that iconic song would normally evoke is completely gone, as much like many other Indiana motifs throughout this film, they also fall short and hollow. As the credits roll, you're greeted with a bunch of names that nobody recognizes, and it becomes painfully clear, as if it wasn't already, that this was meant to be a cash grab and nothing more, as everyone writing this film had no idea what universe they were even writing for. Our hero is no longer the title fucking character of Indiana Jones, but an unbearable woman that in no way mimics women of the 1960s or even a Jones family member, and instead is more of the modern woman we actually see today. Heartless in the face of family, selfish in every conceivable way possible, and an opportunist in romance. Yeah, she totally got engaged to a dude for opportunity and nothing more, it's revealed. And is presented as strong without any development, let alone sequences to support that strength she supposedly has. On top of that, she's delusional in the exact way 2023 women are to a T.
Love yourself a little bit more, bitch. I'm a 10. I'm a 10 through and through.
In fact, Helena ends up being nothing more short of the stereotypical Mary Sue we see Disney and Lucasfilms revisit over and over and over again. Having a father in archaeology seems to have granted her endless knowledge in obscure languages, despite the film making it abundantly obvious that her father did not have a strong presence in her childhood. She's also somehow attractive enough to mesmerize wealthy Middle Eastern gangsters and Nazi physicists alike, despite having the facial structure of a broken cliff and a build that makes McLovin the Hemsworth of modern cinema. The only instance of femininity you could see her display is when she gets covered in bugs because women stereotypically hate bugs. Helena is the exact opposite of Marion, who had always stood out as the most iconic and lovable of all of Indiana's female companions. She was strong, but her feminine nature was never overshadowed. She complemented Indy's personality and was more or less the exact woman you would expect a Spitfire, like Indiana Jones, to hitch his horse to. Helena has no charm, and everything down to her eating mannerisms are overly masculine, to the point where you could easily forget that this is supposed to be a 30-year-old woman. To top this off, Helena and Indiana Jones have zero chemistry whatsoever. And for the vast majority of this film, and I mean until like the last 20 minutes, they're just bickering, and Helena displays nothing but disdain for Indy, despite him helping her out of basically every situation they get themselves into. She leaves him for death at the hands of both Waller's mad baddies and the CIA. She attempts to abandon him in a foreign city while on the run from her former lover. She insults his very intelligence by lacking honesty, and she undermines his masculinity by assuming he cannot correct his own wrongdoings, let alone carry his own on an adventure. By comparison to the last Indiana Jones entry, Mutt Williams and Indy had chemistry in that they both had a stubborn heart of gold, and that ultimately bonded the two in the same way that Indy and Jones Sr. were able to bond in The Last Crusade. The final act of the film, where we see Helena become an actual human being with a soul, which funnily enough is ushered in while the pair steal a wedding car, is purely out of convenience to add some sort of emotion to the final sequences of the film. As a woman who enjoys Indiana Jones and can appreciate well-developed female protagonists, Helena Shaw is nothing to admire, let alone be proud of in this whole era of female representation. Oh, Mads. Oh, Mads. Oh, Mads. You were completely wasted in this film. Perhaps he has a contractual obligation, but Disney and Lucasfilms has done this dude dirty time and time again with all the appearances he's made for them. His goal to take out Hitler to make sure the Nazis win is an incredibly promising plot direction, which is just thrown in as an afterthought. I would have much rather see the final act of the film be Waller and Indy fighting in 1939, as opposed to witnessing the Spartan battle that we ended up getting. He's relegated to a placeholder antagonist and nothing more, and is also dumbed down hilariously in the final 20 minutes to just offer plot convenience. In the instances where he does come across as menacing, though, he commands the screen, and it's a glimpse of hope for this film, which is about the only one I can spot in all 2.5 hours of it. The action sequences are tired cliches of ones done in the original trilogy and ones that were done far better 40 years ago than today, using some ingenious practical effects instead of jarring green screen backdrops. These tropes that are in here are hollow at best, such as the Tangier's car chase scene, which was unnecessarily long and unoriginal compared to, say, the horse and tank chase sequence in The Last Crusade. Short Round, whose fate from the Temple of Doom still has never been revealed, is mirrored in Teddy, aka the discount Short Round that I've been referencing this whole time. But instead of the maternal love you'd expect him to have for Helena, like the paternal love Round had for Indy in the Temple of Doom, he's a plot convenience at best and a diversity hire at worst, that offers no significance to the character or even comedic relief like Short Round did. Indiana's iconic whip, which is used twice throughout the entire film, one of which was in one of the stupidest comedic relief moments I've ever seen, and then is just never used again in the dozen or so instances it could have come in handy. The plot is not unique, and much like the action sequences, recycles many of the devices we had seen in earlier entries, just with far less pizzazz and excitement. The time travel cliche, which aside from being a lazy crutch for unimaginative Hollywood screenwriters, is typically meant to force characters to grow in ways that the plot otherwise can't allow, but is just as wasted as Mads Mikkelsen here. Stopping Waller and traveling back to the Battle of Syracuse doesn't teach Indy or Helena anything at all, nor does it provide their characters with any depth or development. Sorry, I misspoke. It does provide some development in that it completely emasculates Indiana Jones by making him a whimpering pussy who believes he has nothing to live for and therefore ought to stay in the past because my purpose. Helena learns nothing. Teddy, who's also there, learns nothing. Even the disjointed pilot that is randomly there, who could have been stellar comedic relief, by the way, also learns nothing. As I say it out loud, it's actually pretty clear this movie is redundant from start to finish. Not only as a standalone film, but as a franchise entry. There's so much more. But all in all, this feels like a heartless entry that was a piece of self-insert fanfiction, akin to the way 50 Shades of Grey was self-insert Twilight fanfiction. While the ending doesn't hint to the torch being passed like Crystal Skull did, it's left ambiguous enough paired with some of Kathleen Kennedy's recent comments that it's entirely possible we get Phoebe Waller-Bridge take the mantle should her endeavors destroying the Tomb Raider franchise over on Amazon fail epically. After 2.5 hours, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny stands as a testament to the laziness of modern Hollywood, which continuously fails to create intriguing stories and characters and instead chooses to mercilessly recycle fame for a quick buck. Leaving the theater, I didn't even feel that laughable satisfaction of, I knew it would be bad, but instead sadness for the absolute decimation of a beloved legacy character. Anyways, that's all I have for today. Thanks for stopping by and stay frosty, friends.